Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm James Barron. It's my pleasure to welcome Dieter Schwarz back to the gallery for a Zoom conversation on his epic book, Sol LeWitt Folds and Rips, which was published just about 2 years ago. Dieter is an independent art historian and curator. He has been retired from the director at Winter Tour since 2017, has written books on Cornelis LeWitt, Bryce Marden, Gerhard Richter, John Chamberlain, and many others. Dieter, welcome.
Hi, James. Thank you. Thank you very much, and good evening to everybody. Oh, good noon for everybody. It's evening here in Switzerland.
Well, it's interesting because we've almost bookended the virus. You were on at the very beginning of 2020 when the virus was really raging, and hopefully we're seeing it wane now. So that's kind of an interesting time framework.
Right. Let's hope that's a good sign. The book is running out of copies as well, so people were reading it through the pandemic, it seems.
Well, there's kind of an amazing thing you mentioned to me yesterday that you had printed, I believe, 1,200 copies of this book.
1,500.
And it's like getting close to being sold out,
right.
Which is quite an achievement for a book that is, we're not talking about a John Grisham book here. This is, a catalog raisonné of the R series of Sol LeWitt. So congratulations on that.
Thank you. No, it's a very dry book, and I'm surprised myself that people love it, obviously.
It may be dry, but for, like LeWitt nerds like me, it's like reading a comic book. I mean, to look at the very end where you've got this description of where the works were created, it's really pretty amazing. Anyway, we're looking right now at the cover. The next slide, please. I thought maybe you could set the framework, Dieter. What was happening with LeWitt up until 1966 when he started the R series?
In the mid-60s, when Sol LeWitt was beginning with his work, it was very much about the challenge to create something really new, something which hadn't been there before. He was not alone in that. There were many other artists doing the same thing. And for him, it was very deliberate to create new categories of work, not just paintings or drawings or sculptures. But the first show, which he did in 1965, he called his work not sculptures, but structures. So structure means something you can add to, so you can develop. It's not a fixed entity like a sculpture, it's something else. And after the structures came the wall drawings, an invention, then came drawings, and then came the folds and the rips. And all these new types of works were really new categories of work, something which hadn't been there before. For instance, the wall drawings, that you could do a drawing which would disappear afterwards, but which would still be present as a concept. And that was one of the main ideas which was leading him. He thought about, and he also spoke about the fact, how can an artist sell his work? And he said in a paper, an artist cannot sell his work. The work will always belong to him. It can be lent out, it can be given, whatever, but the work is always the artist's. So to find a solution to that problem, because the artist has to survive on his work, he said, well, the idea is mine. The idea is the artist's idea, but there can be various manifestations of this idea. And the manifestations can be sold, can be distributed, but the idea is still with me. The idea is not saleable. And so he found these ways of distributing by doing variations on an idea. And we have now just in front of us this invitation card from 1966, which he did for a group show of 3 artists at Park Place Gallery, run by Paula Cooper at the time. And for this invitation, it just has typeset all the text which is needed. But then this invitation sheet is folded into little squares. And it's not one copy, it's maybe a few hundred copies which were mailed out at the time. And every copy is as good as any other one, because the idea is to create something, a kind of a drawing, a kind of an almost invisible drawing by folding the paper. So at the same time, the idea of the fold was born, but also the idea the fold could be many folds, that the fold was not just one thing, but that the fold could go in many different directions. Maybe that's the outline of what is coming afterwards, because then the folds are lying quiet for a time. And in 1970-71, Sol goes back to this idea and starts creating folds in various ways. first as a giveaway to friends, but more and more as a commercial object, as something to be sold in his exhibitions. And in the same year, the ribs are born, not folded, but ribbed papers, and we will see examples of it now in the course of our conversation.
Now, in terms of this Park Place invitation, could you explain, did he sign one or two of them, and are those considered the actual folded piece, and the others are now considered ephemera?
Oh, I haven't seen a signed one. I have to say I saw a few, not many, maybe 3, but all of them unsigned. And I think it was not about signing, it was really about distributing them. However, when he started doing the folds in 1971, each one of them was unique and was signed and dated. And so the folds are manifestations of an idea, but they're different, they're varied, and he used different papers, different types of folding, but they're always going back to the idea of folding a piece of paper.
Good. So we're looking now at an installation photo of our show at James Barron Art, which is called Sol LeWitt R Series. The Truth is Funny. And this is an idea I do want to get to in a minute, but you're looking at some ripped pieces, which include the 6 orange works. There's a map, which is of London. We'll get to that. Then there's a folded and another ripped piece. Next slide, please. Dieter, take us through this, please.
Yeah, well, an important resource for doing the research on the folds and rips history were the notebooks and the ledger files of Sol's. He kept his notebooks, and they are not diaries in the sense that he wrote what he was doing that day, but diaries, importantly, because he jotted down the work. He took notes of the work he was doing that day, and he also noted to whom he had sold or given it that day. So here are the descriptions of 2 drawings, which he had done for somebody. It's Conrad Fischer, KF, the upper one, Sol LeWitt for himself, the lower one. And in the lower part of this diary page, we see 40 ribs for Bonomo. This was his gallery in Bari in Italy. And you see the numbers R464 to R503. And he used coffee filter paper at that time. And he makes a diagram here of how he ripped or cut into the coffee filter paper, which is round shape. And so these are the 40 variations he created that day. And it's important to say that day because Sol did it mostly this work when the day of the opening was there or approaching, when he had extra time, and he did a few such rips for the dealers or for whomever was there at the time.
It's very complete.
Complete.
This is an aside, but going back to that last page, Maria, Jeanette and I have been invited to Spoleto, to the Festival of Two Worlds last summer, and Carol LeWitt was being honored by the town for her philanthropic and cultural achievements. So we actually went to the tower and we saw some of the very earliest Sol LeWitt wall drawings, which were staggering. And the sense of history of this moment was really brought very clearly to me, that this was not a moment where LeWitt was selling things on an international level. He was dealing with galleries very much on a local level. Can you talk about that a little bit, Dieter?
Well, I mean, he was international because in the early 70s, Sol, like other American artists like Lawrence Wiener or Robert Barry or Mel Buckner, he was traveling from city to city where these small galleries were. Galleries not like they are today, but galleries mostly consisting of 1 or 2 persons. And they shared the air ticket from New York to Europe, and he was going from place to place. And on site, he did the work to sell there because it would have been too costly to ship structures or work from New York to these galleries. And different from today, these galleries were always catering to a local audience. A Belgian gallery was catering to Belgium, a German one, Conrad Fischer, to Düsseldorf and surroundings, a gallery in Switzerland, maybe to Zurich and the area, the gallery in Basel, to Basel and the area. It was such a different art world from today. And it was important for this reason to travel and to be present on site, to do the work there, get to know the people, get to know the clients, and go on the next day and go to another gallery and do another show. So when we look at Sol's shows in this year, so you always see that he really travels from one place to the next, and that he was very economical with his time and of course with his money as well. So that was really a different art world. And that made it possible to distribute also the folds and the ribs. This is an important background for this type of work.
I think that's the point I was trying to make. I didn't articulate it. I was trying to say that he was, of course, international, but these galleries were not international. Listen was basically confined to London, and even in a sense, maybe a particular neighborhood in London, as opposed to now where the sun never sets on the Listen empire. Next slide, please. All right, Dieter, so we have a really beautiful fold drawing. This is one in our exhibition from 1972. Can you lead us through this, please?
This was maybe Sol's first important exhibition, 1972 in October at the Kunsthalle Bern, which was a real survey of his work, the first kind of Kunsthalle show or museum type show. No, well, there was The Hague before, but this was like the second one of that size. And so he was present, and on the day of the opening again, these sheets are dated October 6th, 1972. He did a few folds and a few ribs to sell, because the Kunsthalles in Europe, they were also trying to raise money by selling prints by the artists, which they were showing. And in this case, this was not a print, but a fold, some folds and some ribs. And he started with just folding a sheet twice, then a few times more and more and more and more. And there's an entry in the sheet, the secretary's notebooks, where she says, Sol said you can order more if you want. They might have different shapes or different papers, but you can order whenever their people are interested. There were a few orders, and I think in my book I have just noted down all the sheets done for the Kunsthalle Bern. They were all 60 by 60 centimeters, square formats of obviously a paper he had found there, because he was using local papers, whatever was just on site.
So next slide, please. So this is another one the same day. We're really thrilled to have two together that one could probably argue they've not been seen together in an exhibition, and maybe never. So this was kind of a thrilling thing. And the first time I read your book and I came across that entry for this date, October 6, 1972, I said, oh my God, like these two are from the same day. This is phenomenal.
Yeah.
When you look at these ripped pieces, it's very intriguing to kind of look at the order of maybe how he ripped them. Is that something you do?
Yes, absolutely. And again, you see the logic. He first rips the sheet apart vertically, then he rips it apart horizontally the same way in the center. Then he rips the lower parts one time and the upper parts one time, but once vertically and once horizontally. So you have horizontal and vertical rips within this same sheet. And you know, you were quite right, James, saying they had not been shown. Yes, they never had been in an exhibition. They were just offered, sold to the people, maybe at the ticket counter, you could get them. And these rips you would get in an envelope. Just in an envelope, you had to find out yourself how to frame them, what to do with them. And so you had to figure, I mean, going back from the rib to a complete image. And what is also maybe important is that you cannot see so much because the rib maybe is more visible, but on the folded sheet, you have really to look precisely to see where the folds are going. And this is the same thing for the early wall drawings. You mentioned the ones in Spoleto. If you see the very first wall drawings, they are almost invisible. There's very fine pencil lines, and you have to go very close to decipher these wall drawings that are not so colorful as the later ones we know. And it was of course also about denying visibility or about making it more difficult to look at the work of art, and not about making it so easy with the more aggressive works from his later years.
Dieter, there's a point that I'd like to make when we're talking about the order of the rips or the folds. If I'm looking at a Matisse painting, I'm looking at, is the black underneath the red and the green, or is it on top? What's the order of how he did it? So I'm intrigued with the fact that even these works which are so minimal in relation to a Matisse, your eye is still doing the same thing. I find that intriguing.
Absolutely, yeah. If you look at this, you want to know how he had them done, and so and you find out the logic of it. And I think the logic, the systematics are this important part, because this is the idea behind it, and this is just a manifestation of it. But you're going back to his idea when you start looking at it and deciphering the ribs.
Let's look at the next slide, please. Oh, here we go. It's very interesting to look at this, both what's written on the front and the back. Dieter, lead us through these three.
Well, on the front, it's always on the front. Sol LeWitt always noted the R number, the rib number. He signed them. At times he put it the place and the exact date on them. This may vary. And on the back, he very often, not all the time, but he very often wrote, not to be sold for more than $100. And that's one of the points which he made, that the folds and the ribs had a unique price. If they were tiny or very big, like the London rib, which we're going to see later, they always were $100. And this was like, it was kind of a provocation that the artwork should have unique price, and the value would be of course, also always the same. And this has nothing to do with the richness or the size or the material or what it was done from. And he insisted that these works also by resales shouldn't be sold for more than $100. And I think his dealers were quite loyal. I knew of somebody who in the 80s bought at John Weber 2 ribs from his storage, and John Weber said, well, they are $100 and I shouldn't change the price. So that was the point.
That's incredible. By the way, $100 in today's currency would be $804. I looked it up. But I do love that Sol LeWitt is always trying to break down the commercial art system and in a way simplify it. We've talked about the wall drawings and these works. One thing I love about the wall drawings is it can't really be damaged because the certificate is the artwork. So if somebody, like if I'm showing a work, if somebody comes by with a backpack and they scratch the wall drawing, you get it repainted. It's not a big deal. You haven't lost any value. There's the very interesting story about John Baldessari with the drawing, which was thrown away. Do you mind recounting that?
Yeah, well, John had obviously received a fold from Sol, and he had taken it to his framer to get it framed. And the framer didn't really consider it as a work of art. He threw it away. And so that's this letter from, well, I don't have it exactly how it was. Let me just, you have to make it better in your mind than I have.
Peter, it was his warehouse had wrote a letter.
Warehouse, yeah, that's not the frame, it's a warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the letter confirming the disappearance of the work is then because it gets folded and is a fold again. So anything could be declared a fold by the artist.
What LeWitt did basically, am I right? He folded it vertically and then he signed it. And then that became the folded work. So, and one thing we talked about a bit the last time, but I do find it really interesting is if you're looking at paintings, let's say in the art market, a large work is worth more than a small one. A painting is worth more than a drawing. I mean, these things are completely insane. They make no sense at all. It's a way of making a framework so that there can be a market. But I feel like LeWitt goes against that in a really beautiful way. By the way, Susanna Singer, who's a very dear friend of mine, and she had run the LeWitt studio from roughly 1980 until his death, had said to me, yes, you're right. He was very, very funny, but he was serious about this, not to be sold for more than $100.
Absolutely, absolutely. And even when the ribs and folds were over in the around 1980, 79, 80, Sol continued to do this $100 thing as a collector, or you could give him $100 and he would send you a postcard with a little sketch on it. And this was always $100. And so you find on auctions at times, you find these little sketches and postcards, and they're also $100 works, just later ones.
This is a slight aside, but it's related. He would do trades with artists, and young artists, sometimes often unrecognized, or older unrecognized artists. And Carol LeWitt told me a story where he had done an exchange, and then the artist said, "This is not fair," and sent more works in the mail to Sol LeWitt. And he said, no, it was an even up deal. And then he sent that number of works back to the artist. And this is something that I find in terms of today's art world, where it can seem a little bit crass sometimes, even to those of us who have been doing this for 41 years, it's refreshing to have this voice, this kind of a voice operating within the system, but operating outside of it too. Next slide, please.
Well, these are just, oh yeah. This is, yeah, there are just 3 more of the Byrne works, and you can see that he continues folding. There are always more folds on the sheets. And below there's this note by the secretary. And the fact that she writes 375 Swiss francs, this was the value of $100 at the time in Swiss francs. So that's why she has this amount.
Dieter, I forgot to point it out, but in the last, where we had the inscriptions on the bottom, he actually missed a number when he was recording October 6th, 1972. If you look carefully, it's October 6th, 192. And I find that so interesting because he was obviously very systematic, but you had mentioned to me there were some mistakes, some numbers which are repeated. Could you elaborate, please?
Well, I think in this case, it was October 6-72. I think I can read it. I can read it that way. So, I mean,
but on the top, it's on the top, it's October 6th, 1972.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just an interesting aside.
When I tried to establish this catalog for the book, I found out that there were numbers which appeared twice, and these were just mistakes Sol has made. Or then he did a series of works and he used numbers. And a few months later, in another city, he starts doing rips again, and he starts before the numbers. He's using a whole series of numbers which he has already used, and I think he was not aware of it because the notebook was not always so precise. And so he's the great systematic at the same time. He's also very chaotic and very free, and he can do human mistakes. So that's also a funny part of it. And also inscriptions. I see I know a sheet in Switzerland, and he writes a sheet with the upper left corner ripped off, and actually the upper right corner is ripped off. So he went through all the different variations, but then he made this mistake and doing the wrong inscription on the wrong sheet. So this can happen as well.
So now we're looking at another work that's in our show at the gallery, and it's interesting because he's clearly ripped.
This is a unique one, a very unique, special one. He did two such works for Cutout Gallery in Houston at the time, and one is a fold, but for some reason, all the outer edges of these sheets have been ripped. And then at the same time, he did can you show the next image? He's doing a rip, and there are two sides of the papers which have not been ripped, and two edges which have been ripped. So he must have been doing this choking and going a bit beyond his own categories, going from rip to fold, from fold to rip, and mixing them up very consciously. So these are two extra special sheets. The second one is in the Mendel collection in Houston right now. So
curious, Dieter, in looking through his notebooks, did you ever see that he saw an allusion either to landscape or to a figure or to an object in these rips?
No, I don't think there can be one. I mean, anybody can see something in them, but for him, it was just a practice, doing it very logically, very consequentially, ripping and folding these papers, but without any allusion to anything in the other world, in the real world, let's say.
Let's see the next slide. This is another view of our exhibition where we've got a map, then the orange ripped pieces. On the left is the work that we just saw that had been done in Houston. Next, please. All right, now we have this sort of epic series. Very fortunate to have 6 that a private collector had and has given to us for the exhibition. Dieter, let's talk about these fold drawings from 75.
Well, in 73, there's something new starting in Sol's work, a new idea. And the idea is the location of something on a plane. Well, an artist always has the problem, if he's drawing or painting, what is the reason for putting a form, a shape on a plane? And you can do it in a classical modernist way by balancing the forms. And so the position is explained by the fact that there's a balance, there's an inner harmony or something of that type. Sol LeWitt chose a very different way. He was explaining in words why a shape or why a line should be somewhere on a page. And so this is a theme which he's working on in wall drawings, on real drawings, and also on folds and on ribs. And so we have this very simple fold at the upper edge of this square page, but then he inscribes it a fold from the midpoint of the left side to the midpoint of the top side. And he doesn't describe it at the bottom of the sheet, but he inscribes it along the fold. So the fold, which otherwise might be almost invisible, becomes very visible. So the inscription underlines what he's doing. What he's been doing is very simple, but he gets this kind of an extra note by the description. And this description is simple, and he gets more and more complicated with his descriptions.
Were there other artists at this time, 73, 75, using words that you think that Sol was either friendly with or associated his work with, or seemed to have a cross-reference?
Well, of course, he was aware of his peers working with words, but I think all the artists found unique ways to work with words. Sol's is also a very unique way. He said, as you quote, has a quote here, it's my poetry or his literature. And he was maybe not so wrong using the word poetry or literature, because he was a reader of Beckett, of Samuel Beckett, and he loved this kind of futile proceedings in a Beckett novel. Description of something very complicated and long, which is completely futile, doesn't have any sense at all. And so if he is making here a cut into a square page and uses 3.5 lines to describe a simple cut, this creates an absurd situation full of kind of a tongue-in-cheek humor. And this is really Sol's way of using words, which is so different from Lawrence Wiener or Mel Buckner or whoever was around at the time.
You know, it's intriguing because when I'm reading these, I'm not saying I'm belly laughing, but I do laugh out loud when I read them because my mind cannot calculate exactly what I'm being told. And yet it's the most simple, plain English that could possibly be used. Mm-hmm. So I find that dichotomy really, really fascinating.
And also, I mean, if you look at the simplicity of the cut, and if you read the description, which gets more and more complicated, and it's always difficult to gather in your mind what he's saying, because to follow his points you have to go really with your finger and go along to understand what he's describing here, because it's so complicated.
And in a sense, this relates so directly to the wall drawings, where you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that LeWitt saw himself almost as a composer with music, and then there would be an orchestra that would perform. Those would be the draftspeople who would do the rendering of the wall drawing. Mm-hmm. And I see such a direct relationship between this type of work and the wall drawings, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the wall drawings, it's also about describing something to do, and you can doing it. And there are wall drawings which have extremely complicated descriptions where you wonder that the draftsmen were able to put them into reality, put these things on the wall at all, because it's really, it drives you crazy if you're reading these pages and pages and pages of descriptions. And you'll have one more which is coming up with this drawing which you have, which is the extremely elaborate one.
Let's look at the next one. Right.
I mean, you see it now from close, but also it's always a visual element on the page. And if you look at these square sheets, and it's always something, an accent on the page.
I love reading those. It's just absolutely fabulous. Okay, the next, please.
And I have to say that this was when he was doing something, he was really going through it completely. And he had done like a dozen or more, 13 for Daniel Weinberg in San Francisco or Los Angeles. And these are from the Weinberg series. And then he went to Holland and he did another set for his Dutch gallery in Amsterdam, on also on orange paper and rectangular sheets. And so, I mean, if he was into something, he really went through it and he made it very consequentially and didn't just stop after a few. It went on and on with this kind of thing. So there are at least 25 orange ones, but all different, one different from the other ones. And
actually the Menil has some of the orange ones as well.
Yeah, exactly. They're in Europe, in the American museum collections.
All right, so now we're into the maps. All right, Dieter, a completely different element of the R series. Could you tell us about this?
Well, in 1974, when Sol was spending time in Florence for a gallery show, he must have found these prints, and they were funnily, they were published by the Italian military, by the army, because for some jubilee, and this was an air view of Florence, and below you see a series of the monuments, of the famous monuments of Florence. And as Sol had described geometric shapes on a page, like a cut or a square or a circle or something, he now thought, well, if you can describe an abstract shape, you also can describe a walk through the city. And he had his daily walks, and he tried to draw the lines from the one point to the next, to the next, to the next, and created thus a geometrical shape. And he wrote these texts at the bottom of the sheets, and he cut out this geometrical shape. And the next move was that he found out, well, you can use the cutout shape as well, because the cutout shape is just as much as a rib as the positive form where you have cut it from. So when he was doing one of these sheets, he just always got two ribs, and this was also kind of an economical thing. You didn't have just one, but two at the same time with one move of work. So if you read these texts, a photo of Florence with the area between the Badia, Santa Maria Novella, Ponte Vecchio, and Piazza San Marco removed. And it's also again his humor that he removes parts of Florence among the famous, within the famous monuments. I mean, this is not harming the city, but it's fun to cut into the image of a city, just to play.
It's also sort of a funny idea, because Florence is no stranger to tourists, and yet you're almost like you're making a donut hole out of the very places everybody wants to go. Next slide, please. So once he had found this idea of the air views, and that you could have geometrical shapes by connecting monuments, the next step was when he had a show in Amsterdam. He took a city map from Amsterdam. He didn't have an air view, but he had various city maps. And again, he cut out important parts of the city, like the Amsterdam River, or then the area between some important squares or some museums. And again, there are so many ways of cutting a shape from a city. And here, of course, the relationship is also funny, because the maps are huge. They're like 34 inches, which is really something, 34 by 41 inches. And the cutout area is very, very small. You have to look for it to find it. So when you got this rib for $100, you got really some paper. And you have the description on the bottom, and you had to find what was really the missing part. Next, please.
Next comes London, the next show at Listen Gallery, and it's the same idea that this is Amsterdam again, that he removes from this map several parts, and as you see at the top, he also uses the cutout shape, and there are funny shapes which he hadn't been using before. Before it's always squares and triangles and circles, and now Sol gets into a completely new domain by all these irregular shapes which are being created by his cuts into the cities. Next. And now comes London. And what he's now connecting are three galleries. This is the Listen Gallery on the north, where he has been showing. There's the Nigel Greenwood Gallery below, where he also had been showing. And there's the Tate Gallery, the museum, which of course was important for him, and where he was showing his prints. So the three galleries are connected and they create this triangular shape. And this was part of a group of such London rips, which he was showing at Listen Gallery. For once, this was really part of his show. And I think you will see an image of that show.
So this is a work which is in our current exhibition. And it's very funny because it is just a map. And yet you're looking at it. Are you looking at the condition? Are we concerned whether it's a map that's been used? I mean, it's just so funny. And then also just to look at the beautiful graphic quality of this orangey red, which is actually somewhat related to the pieces that he was doing with the rip. Next, please.
This is the inscription which describes the area of London between the Listen Gallery, the Nigel Greenwood Gallery, and the Tate Gallery removed. And then comes the rip number.
It's funny, it's almost like trying to keep something that's valuable to him. These are like his holy shrines in London.
Yeah.
Set out. Next, please.
Well, this is the show, and this show was in the cellar of the Listen Gallery. This was the second part of the show. You had to go downstairs to see it. And you can see, I mean, how simple these shows were at the time. You just were cramming these works into a cellar because you wanted to show them. It was not really so elegantly done like today. It was just what was there, and it had to be on the walls. And you find the triangular. You see the triangular, the positive and the negative one. You see them on the front wall.
And it's also interesting because obviously Listen has become a mammoth gallery, but this was located near Edgware Road, kind of near Paddington Station, in almost a outlying area. You know, it's almost like a quaint little street at the time.
Yeah.
The next, please. So we have a work, a location of a blue square in our exhibition. It's really a tangent piece because it's not an R series, but from 1976. We thought it would be interesting to include it because of the amount of procedural description, which is at the bottom.
I think here you really can see how important visually the description is. It's more than just one line or three lines. It's a real block. It's a dark block within the drawing. So it creates something visually new, which hadn't been there in Sol LeWitt's work. And also, I mean, if you just see the three shapes, it's three geometrical shapes which have no relation between whatsoever. You cannot create a geometrical relation, but they have a text relation. So the relation is only understandable if you go down to the text, dig into it deeply, and let yourself take into this geometrical abstract world, abstract and absurd world.
It's absurd, but the words serve almost like a base. It's almost like a base of a cube, which is very interesting. It feels that way sometimes to me.
Yeah.
Next, please. I love this quote.
Yeah.
The more information that you give, the crazier it gets, until to construct a very simple form or figure, such as a circle, you could have 3 pages of text. In a way, it was an extension of the idea that prolixity created simplicity and unity.
Yeah, when you also see that he made a mistake in the first line and he goes on, it was obviously difficult to concentrate on getting all the terms right at the right moment. So I wonder how he did these texts at all. They're so elaborate.
Next, please.
Well, in my research, I've thought, well, when did Sol show these works, the rips and folds? And he rarely had shown them. At the Listen Gallery London Maps show was exceptional. And he had a few plans, but in fact, the rips and folds were rarely exhibited. But then when he had his first retrospective at MoMA in 1978, John Weber did a little pre-retrospective in his gallery. And this was a show of prints and drawings and of folds and of rips. And for the first time, Sol underlines the importance of this type of work by putting in so many. This is just one of the pages of the checklist for the exhibition, and also with a kind of a hanging proposal for the folds and for the ribs. So this is as a document, really important because it shows that he wanted to have these ribs and folds present in this kind of mini retrospective at his then major gallery.
We'll go through some of the slides and
yeah, this is really nice. The top image, this is his show in 1971 at Lisson Gallery. And it documents what the show of Sol's work was at the time, because it's like the inventory of what he has. To the left, there's a wall drawing. You can, of course, you kind of see it. Then follow drawings, working drawings, and then come prints, silkscreen. And on this very short last wall to the right, there are 3 or 4 folds, very modestly hung, but they're there. And so he shows in 1971 what he has to offer to the viewers. And maybe just an afterword, because it shows also his way of behaving. After the 71 show, when Nicholas Lockstein writes him, you have so much money in the gallery for you, I can send you the money. And Sol writes back, no, don't send the money, but just with this money, buy one work by Richard Long, by John Stiesecker, by John Hilliard, and so on, by all his peer artists from the gallery. And he got the works delivered from his peers. So the money remained with the gallery. Very generous.
But he did get the upper hand on that deal.
Yeah.
So these
at that time, this wasn't worth anything, you know.
Okay. But time proved him right. Can you take us through these 3?
Well, another material, he took what he found. So he used diploma certificates in Naples. He used in Florence all this gift wrapping paper, which the Italians love, and there were so many various different types available. And he made ribs of them, also very large ones, where at times he left the edges unribbed, at times he ripped them, all the 4 edges and so on. Just a few examples of all the possibilities he used in this rib oeuvre.
Next.
Well, after Florence, London, Amsterdam, of course, New York has to come at some moment. And he found air view photographs of New York, 3 different ones. And I still have not been able to detect where they are from. They must be from some municipal, from some administration, some board, but it hasn't been possible to find until now where they're exactly from, because they must have been a bit older already in the 70s when he was getting them, and he must have had a pile of them ordered, obviously from somewhere. And he started doing the same thing he had done in Florence. He started connecting important points of his life in Manhattan. For instance, all the area, all the houses where he had lived, or his galleries in Manhattan, and on and on. And this is maybe one of the largest groups of ribs, the Manhattan ribs, on these square photographs. And on the other side, we see the consequence of the folds. I mean, Sol always liked to do the contrary of what he had done before. For him, it was not important to draw straight lines all his life. He had straight lines, wiggly lines, interrupted lines. And so if you have folds, straight folds, you can also crumple a paper, and then you have hundreds of completely irregular folds in this paper. So he did a few crumple drawings, which he, using exactly this Italian paper, which we have seen before here on the top. And he did some crumpled city maps for Chicago city map for an exhibition in Chicago in 1979. They have disappeared. This is the only one I have ever seen, the one at MoMA. I wonder, there were about a dozen of these. I wonder where they are. They haven't surfaced up to now. So still something to discover for you, James.
Dieter, it's interesting because you've been something of a detective with this series. And I would imagine, as an art historian and independent curator, the world that you inhabit when you're doing a book must affect your daily rhythm, your daily sensibility. For instance, if you were doing a project on German Expressionism or work during the war, it must be a little bit heavier, but I would imagine this was sort of a light experience for you. I mean, obviously a lot of detail and you had to systematize yourself, but in a sense, these are very lighthearted, absurd, illogical, logical works, right? Has it been enjoyable for you?
Oh, absolutely, because you go through your notebook, whom have I met? Might have these people eventually a rip or a fold? And surprisingly, a lot of the people I knew did have some. Over the times, they happened to get them from somewhere. And so I revisited my acquaintances, my friends, but I also got new friends and new acquaintances by doing my research, by writing to people I hadn't known before, and where I suspected they would have some because they were noted in Sol's notebook. And still, I mean, the 70s are far, but still people are alive from that time. And some have passed away, but a lot of them are luckily still here and have their folds and ribs. And this was a lot of fun getting connected to so many people. This was pre-pandemic and I could travel still, meet people. And this was really something nice, something really enjoyable.
Well, my journey with the R series began with Max Renkel, who's a friend of mine from Rome. And he showed me one that was folded and ripped. And I ended up taking one to the Armory show in probably 2011. One thing that I noticed was particular types of collectors gravitate towards particular works. We had the most fascinating people coming to look at these LeWitts, which were still quite obscure and not that well known. And they were connoisseurs. Absolutely everyone who became entranced with them, there was something that I really admired and loved. Maria, the next, please. Maybe we'll go quickly and wrap up a little bit. I wanted everybody to see what it looks like at the back of this catalog of the folds. I mean, Dieter, hats off to you for this work. It's so detailed, and yet there's so much information that those of us who love the work, it's like nourishment. It was like eating a great meal.
Thank you, thank you.
Next, please. We'll go through these another page. Those are the rips. These are some that we've had in the gallery. The one on the right, I'm very proud. We had it in early exhibition, and Jasper Johns bought it. Jasper lives in our area, and it was just such a treat. He studied it very closely and said, I think I'll take it. And I'm proud of that. He keeps it in his studio, and many people have commented that it's near the entry of his studio, so he shared it with many people. Next, please.
Maybe just one remark, because here it's hard to see, but the folds are always so simple. It's like folding a sheet in half, diagonally, vertically, horizontally, and then again folding it half and half, and so on. Very recently, a few weeks ago, an Italian friend sent me an image saying, my son has bought this fold from somewhere in Milan. Could you please tell me something about it? And I said, I'm very sorry to say this is a fake, because this is, first, it's a carton paper. It's a too heavy paper, and Sol loved easy paper to fold, and he would never have used a paper as hard to fold. But then also, it was folded in 5. Sol would never have done this, because to fold a sheet into 5 by 5 is so complicated. You have to measure it, you have to calculate. And this is not Sol LeWitt. It's about doing the simple and direct thing. And so I had several arguments, besides a few more than, which were telling me and convincing my friend, well, unfortunately, this was a fake. And so it was so obvious. I mean, if you understand the procedure of Sol's, then you understand what is real and what unfortunately can also be fake.
It's really interesting that this series that has been seen as so obscure now has fakes. It reminds me of a quote with de Kooning. He was shown a painting of his, and he said, it's a fake, not bad, but I wonder if they can do me on a bad day. And I do love that. Let's look at a few more slides and we're going to wrap it up. These are just other works that we've had through the gallery. Clearly, this is an obsession of mine. I'm very proud to have placed a lot of these with museum trustees. Here are more. Stockholm pieces from 1975. We showed these at the Armory. One collector bought all three, which was fabulous to keep them together. Next. And that's it. So Dieter, I would like to commend you on this remarkable bit of research once again. For those of you who do not have the book, Dieter, could you tell us what's the easiest way for people to get this book?
Well, I think you can find it in New York at 192 Penn Avenue in this nice little bookshop. You can also get it at DAP Art Books or from Amazon. I think you can get it easily if you want to.
I'm curious, will they be reprinting it when it sells out?
Well, we'll see. I would like to do a new Sol LeWitt book once on the drawings. I have some ideas, something which has not been done before. And I think it's worthwhile. For me, it's more important to go forward than just repeat myself.
Can you share with us a little bit about the idea, or would you rather keep it private?
Not at this moment, it's too early.
Good.
So, but well, Carol,
hugely encouraging that you'll be entering into another realm of the Sol LeWitt universe. Dieter, I'd like to thank you for being with us today, and also for this remarkable work that you did. I'd also like to thank my team, Maria Klemus and Dylan Everett, Hasey Cross, and Rebecca Lee for their efforts to put this Zoom together. Dieter, congratulations on this remarkable body of work that you have done. And we look forward to the next.
Well, thank you, James, for hosting me, and thanks to everybody, and have a nice afternoon now.
Come back soon. Take care.